Anchoring is a cognitive bias where an individual depends too heavily on an initial piece of information that is offered when making decisions. This first piece of information is called the anchor. A person uses this first piece of information, also known as the anchor, to make decisions and judgments primarily based off of that anchor point. Information that is similar or near the anchor tend to be assimilated toward it, and those informations that are further away tend to be discarded. Once the anchor is dropped and the value is set, all further negotiations, arguments, and estimates are discussed in relation to that anchor. Just like a pirate ship, once that anchor drops, the boat may sway around the anchor, but that boat isn't going to go to the other side of the island, across the sea, or even across the bay. It will stay to that chain, to that anchor, and will not move anywhere further away from it, and it's just locked in that position, although it may sway. For example, the first price offered to a used car sets an arbitrary focal point for all following discussion. Prices discussed in negotiations that are lower than the anchor may seem reasonable, perhaps even cheap to the buyer, even if the said prices are still higher than the actual market value of the car. Another example is that there has been studies where people spin a wheel that has a predetermined destined end for it to either land on 10 or 65. Participants of this study then had to guess the percentage of UN countries that are African nations. People who landed on 10 guessed around 25% on average, and those who landed on 65 guessed more around 45% on average. So people who don't know the answer to the question were influenced by whether or not they had 10 or 65 to change some sort of judgment that they had no information on. So that's a huge impact. This pattern shows true on a lot of other situations. A group was asked to write down the last two of their social security number, and then they were asked to judge a price of an item that they don't really have a knowledge of the price. Something like a fancy computer system, some bottle of wine, or like a 1965 Elvis harmonica that has like ivory imprints on it. People with a higher social security number would submit bids around 60 to 120% more than the lower social security numbers because of the lower anchor, or because of the higher anchor. So time to put on my tinfoil hat and trying to speculate on other things that might be affected by this is like getting used to when you walk into a new room, and then you get used to the temperature, and then if the temperature goes up, you're like, oh no, it got hotter. But then if it got cooler, you'd be like, oh, the temperature got cooler. I see this effect with the new people that I train for work. When they first start out, when they get their first evaluation, those who get higher scores tend to get disappointed when their next score is a lower but still good score. But when you compare this to someone who had like a horrible first score and then like the same second good score, they are so happy that that there was progress and they did so much better. And compare that to a high performer who also had a good performance, they are like in a terrible mood. So it's crazy how the same score is viewed different ways depending on how their initial mindset was on it. This also reminds me of the Machiavellian book, The Prince, where it talks about where the ruler first comes into power. And the book suggests that the ruler should be more harsh and firm, follow the law, chop some heads, let them fly, let them eat cake, right? Roll the dice and, let the chips fall where they may, and then just get some body bags, right? And then after that happens, after hard times, then the ruler can take a step back, be a little bit kinder to the people, and the people will love him. They will say that he's a kind ruler, that he does so much for the people. But then compare that to my situation where when I just got promoted, I made a huge mistake. So I'm pretty young, and a lot of my new subordinates were a lot older than me, and it felt really hard for me to exercise my control and stuff. So I had to make sure to kind of come from them from more like a learner's level for them to accept me more. And at first it was really good. Like we had dialogue, we were very friendly to each other. But then it came time where their performance wasn't meeting expectations. And then I was like, hey, your expectations aren't meeting your performance. And then they were freaking out. Like they said I was a bad boss, I was mean to them, especially when I was super nice all the time compared to all the other supervisors who towed a very firm line, and they would give all sort of feedbacks and stuff all the time, and then their people wouldn't be as mad as my people were to me because I held them accountable. And then so when I had a new wave of trainees come in, I made sure to be more firm and kind of have that harder fist, that iron fist. And then after a while, then I eased up on the ironness of it and came more like a flesh fist. And and then this flesh fist, people seem to like the flesh fist more than the iron fist. So I was able to be nicer and ease off. And then they saw me as a nice boss, even when I had to keep them accountable for things, because that was their anchor point for me as someone, as a leader who was firm, but then had to do the correctives and all those sort of things, but then was still able to be nice and they enjoyed it, versus the people who saw me as a friendly person, as a friend, and then they're like, what are you doing? You're my friend. This doesn't make sense. So the same actions were seen completely different, and I had to deal with the fallout with the people who had a more friendly viewed anchor of me. And that's crazy. So if I could go back in time, I would have moved that anchor to more of a tough but firm boss who can allow to be nice if everything's good. This example could also be applied to like telling a child that they have 30 minutes to play, and then 30 minutes being the anchor, and then all of a sudden you say, hey, we only have 15 minutes to play. That child would freak out, be so mad. There would just be tears and snot running down their face, and they would just like lose the rest of the 15 minutes just crying. But if you told a child that they only had 5 more minutes to play, 5 minutes being the anchor, and then you said, hey, you actually have 15 minutes, then that child would be super happy that they got to play for 10 extra minutes. And if you're at the same park and then 2 sides of the park that happened, you would have one kid that played for 15 minutes, but then another kid that just cried for 10 minutes. So that's crazy how you can kind of shift how people react to your information. The interesting part about the anchoring effect, that it's really difficult to avoid as well. There was a study where students were given anchors that were obviously wrong. They asked whether or not Gandhi died on or died before or after the age of 9, or did they, right, so they asked whether or not Gandhi died before or after the age of 9, or after the age of 140. Clearly, neither of these anchors can be correct. But when 2 groups were asked to suggest when they thought that he had died, they guessed significantly different. An average age of 50 for the lower anchor versus an average age of 67 for the higher anchor. So a random guess is influenced by a number that has no credence to it at all. They also did further studies to see if, even if the subjects were well informed about the anchoring effect, the people who were still informed but were still exposed to anchoring still had higher estimates than the control group that had no anchor. So even being aware of the anchoring effect, participants were still unable to avoid it. Another study found out even when they offered money for correct information, people were still unable to adjust from that anchor. And there's debate on actually what causes this effect. So there's a lot of unknowns here of what causes it and how can we prevent from people to being avoided by it. So this also relates to people's beliefs. So if they have some sort of entrenched belief, if they receive evidence that confirms it or matches it, then they're more willing to accept it because it's close to their anchor. But they will discard any sort of information that is not close to their anchor. So like it's like a boat on an anchor, and then like the boat's willing to kind of float over to one side of the pond, that if it's still tethered to the anchor, and put on the people on that side of the pond. But if it's like way on the other side of the ocean, the anchor's being like, no way, boat, we're not going that far. Research also shows that people who have areas of experience are less prone to this effect of anchoring, and also people with greater cognitive ability are less prone to anchoring as well. While we are all susceptible to anchoring, we can use it to our advantage by not just underselling and over-delivering, but by just simply underselling and normal performance. Compare that to someone who oversells and disappoints, and all the failed expectations that don't match it. It's a no-brainer to undersell and just give normal performance. Compare that to normal performance and overselling. Our only real fight against this bias is to be more informed and be aware of our surroundings, because even if we are aware of it and get paid to be correct, we're still influenced by it. So watch out. Thank you so much for watching. Everybody subscribes to my channel. Everybody moves their finger to push the like button and the subscribe button. I am confused why you are not subscribing to this channel. It would be weird for you not to subscribe to this channel. Everybody does it. You have 30 seconds to subscribe to be considered normal. Oh wait, there's only 5 seconds. Time's running out to be normal.